This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome everyone to the NASA Online League First Thursday program. For today is September 1st, 2022. We made it through the heat of August. Now I'm Stokes McMillan. Thanks for coming in person, and also thanks for watching on Zoom today. Today we have a great speaker, Astronaut Bob Behnken, and he's going to tell us about his experiences flying on the SpaceX Demo-2 mission, NASA SpaceX Demo-2 mission. So let me tell you about Bob. Bob's hometown is St. Ann, Missouri. He has a Bachelor of Science degrees in physics and mechanical engineering from Washington University in St. Louis, right? He has a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Caltech and a Doctorate of Mechanical Engineering from Caltech. He was selected as an astronaut in 2000, and he is a veteran of 3 space flights, including Space Shuttle missions STS-123 in March of 2008 and STS-130 in February of 2010. His most recent experience in space was serving as the Joint Operations Commander on the first crewed flight of the SpaceX Crew Dragon, the Demo-2 mission, which landed on August 2nd, 2012, and that's what he's going to tell us about today. So Bob has accumulated 93 days in space and 61 hours of EVA activity during 10 spacewalks. He has also served in various other roles supporting human spaceflight, including he was the chief of the astronaut office from 2012 to 2015 and deputy of FOD, Flight Operations Directorate, from September 2021 to April of this year. So without further ado, let me introduce Bob Behnken.
Thank you, Stokes, for that introduction. I feel a little bit awkward because I look out at the audience and there are folks who obviously worked at NASA even longer than I have, and I've been here for more than 2 decades at this point. Folks I've worked closely with in the astronaut office and throughout JSC. So I appreciate you all coming out, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong for my recollection of the facts for these 3 missions, and tell me what your parts in the various missions were as well. I'm interested to hear those things. As Stokes said, I'm happy to take questions, especially during the portion where I'm flipping the slides. I do have about a 15-minute video that kind of summarizes the Demo-2 mission, the SpaceX NASA mission, first flight of the Dragon capsule to the International Space Station. During that, it's a little bit tricky to take questions. I will need assistance from somebody to be able to monitor and let me know there is a question out there so that we can add it in. So with that, let me go ahead and jump forward here. So hopefully you all are seeing that online. Stokes did a great job of kind of covering what my background was before I turned up at the Johnson Space Center. I was a student at Caltech and was able to finish my PhD after going through an ROTC program. It turned out that was the time frame that the Soviet Union collapsed, and there was no need to continue to build up our militaries at the time. And so my classmates that I went through ROTC with were taking 18 months or so to come on active duty. And so I spent that time headed off to get a PhD before being assigned to the Air Force Research Laboratory at Eglin Air Force Base, where I did weapons development tests. I went to the Air Force Test Pilot School, and then I got the opportunity to head off to the F-22 Flight Test Squadron out at Edwards Air Force Base, and I got my hero shot next to Ship 2. That Ship 2, it's a little bit of a funny F-22 because of that black spot that's on the back of it. They were looking closely at what the radar cross-section or infrared signature, all those sorts of things potentially of that airplane, and so it had some unique test features that allowed them calibration and stuff, and so it's got a neat signature on the back with that black spot. Makes it a little bit different from any of the other F-22s. Doesn't fly anymore though. Okay, with that, let me go ahead and jump into my NASA career. You know, I spent a few years after I arrived, like all the astronauts do, going through training, eventually getting assigned to a mission. I spent a lot of time down at the Kennedy Space Center, helping shuttle crews strap into their vehicle, getting ready for their flights, catching the space shuttle once it came back. Out at Edwards Air Force Base on a couple of occasions to catch crews out there to help operate the orbiter while they kind of climbed out and went on with the medical experiments or other things that they needed to do post-flight. Got the opportunity in 2008 to fly for the first time on Space Shuttle Endeavour. It was a mission STS-123, headed to the space station, taking a couple of components, the first Japanese pressurized module as a part of the laboratory for the space station, as well as the Canadian manipulator Dexter, the SPDM. We took that up as well and were able to attach one module to the space station and assemble another module before leaving it behind on space station. This was one of the first night missions after we lost Columbia. And so our mission was a little bit unique in terms of heading into orbit. And then my job on this flight as MS-1, in addition to helping the flight deck crew, was to start getting some good documentation of what the external tank looked like after we got separated, because there wasn't in the dark lighting conditions an opportunity for as much of that video to happen separate from the orbiter. So for folks that went to that mission, it was super, super duper exciting for about 25 seconds until we disappeared into the cloud deck that was there. Luckily for us, that wasn't enough of a cloud deck for us to scrub the launch, but it was right at the limit for being able to accomplish a RTLS landing, return to launch site landing. So it was one of the lowest cloud decks, I guess, that a shuttle flew through, particularly at night like that. And as you can see, just a few seconds after liftoff, we were gone. And not the most concerning picture for your family too, right? As you launch into space, it's not supposed to look like that necessarily. I did the same thing about 2 years later on STS-130, launched again at night out of a KSC on 39 Alpha Endeavour again. This time also taking 2 modules to the space station. We took the cupola, the windowed module that a lot of folks are familiar with. It's kind of the glass bottom boat of the International Space Station. You can kind of look down and see the Earth below you, which is a pretty cool thing. We also took the Node 3 to the International Space Station, which was a pretty great accomplishment from a crew perspective, because it took the toilet and the exercise equipment out of the U.S. laboratory, right? And you can imagine how well that was appreciated by the space station crew that was up there and subsequent crews as well. But in a similar fashion, there's another cloud deck, and this day it was a little bit less than it was on STS-123. We had actually scrubbed on my previous STS-130 launch attempt because of a similar condition and some thunderstorms that were in the area, but a little bit more than 25 seconds, but not a lot more before we disappeared. And in this case, folks were actually able to see the rocket, the orbiter, continue into space once it got past that thin layer that was there. So pretty cool. Both of those missions ended up back at the Kennedy Space Center at the shuttle landing facility at night. So I don't have 2 pictures of the same thing for those, but they both looked very much like this with Endeavour. And other than a timestamp on the photo, you can't really tell a difference between the landings between those 2 vehicles. At nighttime, same runway, same orbiter, looked the same. My most recent flight was quite a bit different, right? It was a small capsule at the pointy end of that Falcon 9 rocket. It was on that same launch pad that had undergone quite a bit of change from when we flew a space shuttle off of it. It had been adapted by the SpaceX team. The white room and the access arm is, you can see it in this photo. Let me see if I'm good enough to manage this laser pointer system on here, but this is the access arm that kind of swings out to allow you to access the capsule, and then swings back away kind of in the time leading up to liftoff. And this strong back that's here kind of supports the whole rocket sack, something we didn't have with this from a space shuttle perspective as well. A lot of changes, but we did get to go mid-afternoon, which was kind of nice, not requiring nearly as much of a crazy sleep shift. This part was also very different, right? To come back in the capsule underneath parachutes and splash down in the water off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida. So pretty cool experience to be able to do that, and pretty exciting to be a part of bringing human spaceflight again to the Florida coast. I was a big part of the launches down at Kennedy, just as a Cape Crusader, strapping crews in, catching those orbiters. It was just an exciting thing. Obviously, it was sad when we wrapped up the space shuttle program, but I was really excited to be a part of flying again off the Florida coast. Okay, the missions, both the space shuttle and the Crew Dragon, in my time, they've since adapted this, went to the forward PMA there on the space station. There's a little white ring that you can see that's been adapted, a docking adapter that's to make it okay for the capsules to come aboard versus the space shuttle. So some work had to be done with that. But other than that, pretty much going through the same location headed into the International Space Station. My photos coming in would all pretty much look the same. You know, you do your Superman pose, point your toes, point your fingers, fly right into the right into the stack, coming through that same port on the space station. During my missions, this was something that was interesting to me. As it turns out, there was a huge spacewalk focus for each of my shuttle missions, and not something I expected to happen on my SpaceX mission to be the same level of spacewalk focused, but that's how it ended up turning out. So here I am during STS-123 on the top of the space station. This is the inspection boom. We had to put some keep alive power so in a future shuttle could actually have access to it, but got a chance to do a few spacewalks there, which was pretty exciting. That was a interesting mission because we had a wide range of spacewalk activities. We installed a pressurized module, we built a robot manipulator, and we did a tile repair demonstration where we took out, you know, a bunch of spackling goo and caulk and repaired simulated damage to orbiter tiles in case that capability was required for the upcoming Hubble mission. So a lot of diversity with respect to those 3 different spacewalks. On my second mission, our real focus was also on spacewalks after we got into orbit, but it was getting those 2 modules installed, the cupola and the Node 3. Node 3 took a lot of spacewalk activity in order to get it ready to be left behind on space station. Power, cooling, and this is myself and Nick Patrick routing a cooling jacket to go around some lines that we're going to allow Node 3 to actually operate and reject heat. And again, I was promised that you guys were not a shy crowd, but I'll pause here with things just to make sure if you have any questions before I continue on. Yes, sir.
On the previous picture, can you explain what those looks like rust on the back?
On the back of on the back of that radiator. I can't explain what that discoloration is. Usually it's some sort of an oxidation is the wrong word, but it's some sort of deterioration of that painted surface is what it looks like to me. And so why it deteriorated that way is probably the source of somebody's livelihood over at the Johnson Space Center, but it's not mine, so I can't answer that question.
If it happened in orbit, it seems very strange.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of those, you know, that hardware had been in space several years at that point, and so you do see some degradation of those painted surfaces, and so, but exactly how that deterioration is playing out, I'm pretty sure it's not a leak of some sort, but it's likely to just be a deterioration of the paint itself.
It doesn't seem like it could be oxidation.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't any.
Yes, sir.
While you were deploying the SPDM from its pallet, did you find any challenges, or is it relatively straightforward?
So the question were there any challenges associated with deploying the SPDM and getting the hardware off of the pallet? You're asking this question because you know the answer. You watched us play this whole thing out. But the SPDM, the small robot hand that goes at the end of the big arm on board the space station, came in a lot of parts. Those parts were put on a pallet and launched on the space shuttle. Now that pallet had some pretty tight tolerance because you don't want to have the robot that you're going to assemble once it gets into space station to be shaking around too much while it's or to shake around in a very specific way is probably a better way to describe it. And so there were expandable diameter fasteners, which are pretty unique and interesting sort of a bolting mechanism. But as you tighten them, you kind of squeeze them, and these little collets expand in diameter, and they hold things in place. And they're pretty good in terms of holding force for a wide range of temperatures. In a way that bolts tend to elongate and have some difficulty from a thermal perspective, kind of maintaining their bonding properties as you go through temperature swings. Those expanded diameter fasteners can be better at that, but they can also be so good at it that it's a little bit tricky to remove the hardware that's supposed to come off, given that opportunity. And so we actually had to potentially work through some thermal cycles to allow, get some sun cycles on that hardware to allow those fasteners to release, even though we had loosened them up the prescribed amount. If you loosen them up too much, they tend to come apart, and all those little collets that are holding it together, they would be free floating in space, which wouldn't be good. And so, we had a balance of how much thermal conditioning do you wait for, how much shaking around do you do, because when you'd be surprised at what a single person on board the space station can do if they oscillate back and forth at the right frequency. You can shake the whole stack, you can shake solar arrays. And so we kind of managed that dance in a way that allowed us to eventually get the SPDM pieces pulled off and get it attached back together. Yes, sir.
So how did your ride to orbit compare between the Falcon 9 and the shuttle?
Okay, I'll get to that when we jump through. When we get that, we're going to watch a video associated with that, and I'll talk about that then. Okay. So second flight, cooling lines, Node 3, a lot of power, hooking things up to take care of that module so they could get the toilet and the exercise equipment out of the lab. My last flight to space station actually turned out to get a series of spacewalks added to it kind of at the last minute, the last couple of months that we're out there. And so I had a fair amount of spacewalking experience going into that flight. And after a couple of training runs at the NBL, they cleared me to go and do spacewalks with Chris Cassidy, who was the single American who was on board the International Space Station at the time. A Japanese cargo vehicle had delivered new batteries for the International Space Station, and those batteries were basically waiting for an EVA crew that could get on orbit and take care of them. And so it was either going to be Chris and I, or it was going to be Chris and one of the Russians. And so with my EVA experience, and when the timing presented itself, they added, they said 4 to 7, and Chris and I only got about 3.5 spacewalks out of it. But they were going to add these spacewalks, and we were able to get that assembly of the space station accomplished. So it was pretty cool for me to go up to space station, build a bunch of it, do some things that created the opportunity, to have that towel repair technique in place for the Hubble mission, and then to wrap it up with kind of a big maintenance operation to keep the space station operating for the foreseeable future. That was a pretty cool opportunity. Yes, sir.
How do you get half a spacewalk?
Well, you finish early. That's how you do it. And so if you get the work that you're supposed to get done early, and I was being a little bit facetious when I said half of a spacewalk, but we kind of had just a little, after 3 spacewalks, we had installed all the batteries that they had said needed to be accomplished. And we called down and said, "Are you sure you don't have another one?" And they said, "No, they don't have any more." But then for that next spacewalk, we did a little bit of cleanup, and then they added a couple of cats and dogs things that were out there. They had me go and look at routing a cable, moving it to configure for something, but stuff that we didn't need to do for our spacewalk. So we got our work done, and they just added some get ahead task to the plate because we had some spare time on our mission. So the cool thing about this picture for me is that it's actually taken from the cupola, which is that module that we brought up there. Chris and I are doing our 10th spacewalk together at this point, which is a pretty cool feat. There's not been a lot of people who've managed to get that many spacewalks under your belt. And so, neither Chris or I probably really expected to have that opportunity and to have the picture taken from the cupola of both of us doing it. And Doug Hurley is the guy who's inside the cupola getting a chance to take that photo. So it was pretty cool. See, with that, I'm going to jump into a video of the Demo-2 mission, and then we'll watch that together. And I'll talk a little bit during it, but it's got music, so it doesn't lend itself very well to questions. So our mission patch, it was done by actually one of Doug's, I believe, nephews that on Karen's side that took care of it. One of the coolest things about this mission was as a graduate of the test pilot schools, if you
We're
ask,
looking at the American-made rocket and spacecraft that will return American astronauts to the International Space Station from American soil for the first time since the retirement of the space shuttle, last flown nearly 9 years ago.
so if you ask Doug and I what the coolest thing we could do as test pilot
We're
school
looking at a
graduates,
live picture now of Bob Behnken
it would have been
and Doug
flying on
Hurley,
one of these
and their
rockets
doors
and
are
getting a
opening.
chance to do a test flight of a spaceship someday.
And there they are, NASA astronauts. Small power, but big cheers. NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. Doug on the left, Bob on the right, and there are their families right in front of them.
You know, we took this convoy out in the Teslas. It was a little bit different than obviously a shuttle launch, but Doug and I got to go together, which I think was really important. And that was a neat thing about shuttle. It was pretty much just the crew headed out to the launch pad. It kind of started the mission off. That really doesn't happen until, you know, they close the hatch now with the Dragon capsule. So it's a little bit different. It's pretty surreal to head to the same launch site and have it be so different. The white room, the access arm, climbing into the vehicle.
SpaceX, seats are in the launch position.
Just very different than the shuttle.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Cosmic Line and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, fun dog.
America has launched.
Smoother than the
So we're
shuttle.
in a new era of American spaceflight and witness the advent of a new generation continuing the dream.
There's a lot of speeches that have to happen at the beginning of a space flight. And so we got through those speeches. That first portion of the flight, that first stage, was much smoother than the space shuttle was. As you can imagine, solid rocket motors that are dumping solids out the back, aluminum and everything else just aren't as smooth as a liquid rocket tends to be. But a very smooth ride. You can see us sitting in the crew module. Doesn't look like we're moving around very much because we aren't. And so it's hard to tell the difference between, or the different stages between the two different vehicles, because we got through first stage, we got into second stage, got the engine lit, and second stage felt a lot bumpier than first stage did on the Falcon 9 rocket, but it wasn't loaded very heavily. So there was just vibration that was coming up. And so if you let your head rest against the seat rest, it would vibrate a lot, kind of like putting your head against the window on a car.
We would like to welcome you aboard Capsule Endeavour.
But the space shuttle really felt like second stage was a lot smoother, but it may have really been associated with just how bumpy the first stage was. It just felt a lot better once you got to the second stage.
Dragon.
So there I am looking through the hatch at Chris Cassidy as we climbed on board.
We have Bob Behnken from SpaceX Demo-2 mission entering the International Space Station, followed by Doug Hurley. Demo-2 crew now aboard the International Space Station.
I always look at this picture and think that we look so suntanned compared to those guys, but they have an excuse. So there we were on board Expedition 63. Originally, we thought we'd be there for 7 to 10 days, and it turned out that got stretched into over 2 months because of those spacewalks that we got added to the mission kind of late in the game. Doug and I each had our kind of favorite thing to do in our spare time from a photography perspective. I tended to take photos like this, videos like this, sunrises. Doug chose land features that he really wanted to capture, and collected as many of those as he could. Every so often, you know, our work would encroach upon each other, where he'd be interested in sun glint in some way, or I would get these photos of the red sands in North Africa that were just striking between the blues and the red and the lighting conditions. This is what lightning looks like, kind of purple fireballs underneath. We happened to be on board the space station during Comet Neowise's arrival, or when it became visible, which was kind of a neat thing for us to be able to see. And I'll get the question at the end if I can. Okay. Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is Chris and I actually photographing a deployable satellite that we had set up in the Japanese module and dumped out, and then tried to take some photos as it went through its deploy sequence and popped out its appendages. We got to ring the bell for the NASDAQ, which was kind of an interesting thing, or Chris did. So we did have some activities inside the Dragon capsule where we checked out the suits and made sure that they were good and functional. A fair amount of science activities ended up on our plate with a kind of minimal training, and it took a little while for them to build up to Doug and I doing maintenance on this furnace facility. But with a single crew member on board the International Space Station, we just didn't have enough hands to get all this work accomplished. So they enlisted Doug and I into the science effort as well. We had some electrolysis activities where we were kind of managing how fluid moved around under different charging conditions. This is a neutrino detector, I believe. This is the plant habitat. And to get it back together took all the strength that I had squeezing it together. So it's kind of an interesting, that's what science looks like if you're trying to grow plants in space. My red face, squeezing the thing, so. But we got it back together, and a year later, my wife was able to be a part of some chili peppers growing inside of it, so that was pretty cool. It's a fluid experiment in a microscope that we had to swap things in and out of. I mentioned the spacewalk activity that we did, which was an unexpected surprise that we were able to be a part of. We were changing batteries out kind of all the way outboard on the International Space Station, so it was kind of a long way out there. This one is done in piece parts, but when you see the second translation path, where which was the one I did on the first spacewalk, it's kind of not broken up, so you kind of just see coming out of the airlock, going up the Cetus Spur, down the forward face, all the way to the end of the space station. And so that's really hanging off the edge of the space station. Yeah, we're all the way to the end. If you go any further, you got to use the safer. So don't do it. But it was pretty interesting activity. You know, we really in the astronaut office focus a lot on getting training opportunity together, where we put the astronauts in the water together and try to do as many of our activities on the ground with our partners as we can. It's not always possible, and in this specific case, Doug and I trained with a couple of other crews to do the space station emergency response, not with Chris and Yvonne and Anatoly. And Chris's crew changed out at the last minute because of an issue with one of the cosmonauts. But once we got on orbit, we were able to figure it out and work together. And of course, I had done some training with Doug, but that was the extent of it. Chris and I hadn't done NBL training or any real EVA training before, but ended up doing 4 spacewalks together. So I do know what the least number of NBL runs you can do with your partner is. 0.
Amazing. So what was it like being that far out on the station?
I think for both, and I think this is saying something coming from Chris when he described it to me, but he says it's a little scary out there, right? And so Chris is a Navy SEAL telling me it's a little scary at the other end of the truss out there, and so it's like I feel the same way. Yeah, we got to be careful, being extra careful, hooking ourselves in. It was my first experience having one of these GoPro high definition cameras with us on the spacewalk and being able to capture some of our activities, which was pretty cool. It's kind of interesting. I didn't fly when there was wet film necessarily as a part of the standard operation on the space shuttle, but just how much the cameras have improved and allowed you to share these sorts of details with people during after a spacewalk is just remarkable. So those batteries, several hundred pounds, big enough that we couldn't attach them directly to our spacesuit. We had to shepherd them back and forth between the two of us and work together to move them. We couldn't rigidly attach them to our suits. They just were too heavy for that.
Did y'all have any issues with any of the humidity or even minor inside the suit or anything?
No. The question was, did we have any issues with humidity or otherwise inside of the spacesuits? And Chris and I, by the time you get to your 7th through 10th spacewalk, you've kind of figured out how to manage yourself inside the suit to avoid building up too much humidity. And that's something you definitely get some experience with, kind of like wearing winter clothes and trying to cross-country ski at the same time. You just can't go as fast as you can because you'll sweat and then you'll be cold. And so we figured out how to manage that. But I think both Chris and I's challenge is actually how much carbon dioxide we can generate. And so figuring out how not to overbreathe the suit was probably the thing that we learned earlier in our careers. But humidity wasn't one of our issues, I think.
So it's kind of like scuba diving then, as far as breathing control.
It is. They can set up a breathing regulator. Typically, there's that awesome photo that Doug was able to get on our 10th spacewalk. But scuba regulators, they tend to have some that you can't overbreathe because they've got some really high flow ones that are just more than typical people can ever get to. But you do need to regulate yourself and kind of manage that. I've done some helmet diving during a NEMO mission at one point, and that was another place where managing carbon dioxide was something you need to recognize your symptoms and manage it. So Yvonne and Doug got us suited up and got us back inside, just did an awesome job.
Our two friends and colleagues, Bob and Doug, as they complete the journey of this amazing test mission. It's hard to put into words just what it was like to be a part of this expedition, Expedition 63. It'll be kind of a memory that will last a lifetime for me. Just all the incredible teamwork and accomplishments. As I look back on the mission that we've had here on the International Space Station, I'm proud to have been a part of much of the science activities that happened over the last 2 months. As Doug and Chris mentioned, the spacewalks and robotics activity.
We did get to add our sticker to that PMA port, and so that was a pretty cool thing to put the first docking to that location.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. The final reconfigurations for undock are complete and nominal.
Dragon copy, go from back on time, our licenses are down, and we're ready for departure.
We copy out.
So this is what I'm used to the video footage and such looking like when you do your spacewalk, right? And so to compare that to the HD GoPro camera, these are those external cameras on Space Station. That's the infrared view of Space Station from inside the Dragon capsule.
Good morning, Dragon Endeavor. I'm happy you went into space, but I'm even happier that you're coming back home.
I'm resigning, Daddy. We love you. We can't wait to see you. Wake up, wake up.
Rise and shine, Dad. Me, Luke, Leo, and Mom can't wait to see you, Daddy. Love you.
Wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up. Say, wake up. Don't worry, you can sleep in tomorrow. Hurry home so we can go get my dog.
We love you, Dad.
Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit sequence start.
Screen, we have visual confirmation of those 2 drogue deployments.
Happening drogue.
All right, so 2 of 2 of the drogues now out.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
Drogues now detach.
And there we have confirmation of deployment of the 4 main parachutes.
We are visual on 4 chutes out.
We are visual. 4 main parachutes deployed. Splashdown.
As you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation for splashdown.
SpaceX
Dragon versus
Dragon Endeavor has returned home.
On behalf of the SpaceX and NASA teams, welcome back to planet Earth. Thanks for flying SpaceX.
They are honored and privileged to fly the flight of the Crew Dragon and Endeavor. Congratulations, everybody at SpaceX.
And we see the hatch is now open. Hatch being opened at 12:59 p.m. Pacific, which is open.
So that's something we didn't have to do with the space shuttle, is come back on a helicopter after we had splashed down. We had the opportunity to come straight back to Houston pretty quickly, faster than we typically did with space shuttle missions. Come down the air stairs, and then my son tries to take advantage of me in my deconditioned state and tackle me at the bottom of the bottom of the steps. So it was pretty exciting to get a chance to come back on a capsule vehicle. Sonny Williams, who was a part of the initial cadre of astronauts assigned to work commercial crew, said that the thing that she was most looking forward to in one of our press conferences was seeing all the shuttle guys come back and actually land under parachutes and touch down, because at the time, you know, both the Boeing vehicle was going to land on land and the SpaceX vehicle ended up in the water. That was going to be a new experience for all of us. The shuttle coming back in, pretty low G environment. You know, you typically didn't see much more than about 1.4 G coming back in and touch down smoothly on a runway. Obviously, if you touch down not smoothly, it would damage the orbiter and you wouldn't be flying it again. But it was a very smooth return on a space shuttle. On the Dragon capsule, you know, we did pull between 4.5 and 5 Gs coming back home, so more uncomfortable, a little bit higher loading as a part of that. The actual splashdown in the water was pretty smooth. You kind of plunged is probably the best way to describe it. If you've ever jumped into the water with a scuba tank on and you get that initial plunge into the water, it felt like we had gone under the water just a little bit. And the reason it felt that way was probably the visuals. There were 2 windows that are on the sides of the capsule, and when water splashed over those windows, it cut off the sunlight, and so it got a little bit darker just for a little bit. So how much we had gotten underwater or how much had been blocked was a little bit of a question, but it definitely felt like we plunged into the water at least enough to get something over the windows to block some of that light. But both Doug and I felt pretty good after the landing. We were worried that in one of the press conferences, I think I said that we would have celebratory vomiting. We were worried about having that potentially, but in the end, we were pretty comfortable. We had about the smoothest day. If you saw the boats sitting there that you could possibly have coming back into the Florida waters. We had one of those unique places that were, from a weather perspective, that those of us who've lived in Houston a long time can appreciate. If you've got a big blue H, a big high pressure system sitting over Houston, it can keep a couple of hurricanes happening someplace else far away from you, but it's kind of stagnated and hot where you are, but you get the big blue H. And so that's what we had, was kind of a stagnant hot day and some pretty big weather systems if you went too far towards the other Florida coast, for example. Yes, sir.
And just real quick, what was I've never heard this discussed, what was the transition between the drogues and the mains? Do you feel like a drop, like a roller coaster drop?
During the transition between the drogues and the mains, you actually feel a little bit of a tumbling sensation. So it's not quite as, hey, they're released. The capsule during that release does not just drop, it actually gets rotation. So the G that you get from being in free fall for a second is not as substantial as the actual rotation. So what we felt was kind of a tumbling situation. Then the mains come out and they're staged, so they don't immediately do the full shock of coming through. And so that each of those staging events actually results in a rocking moment as well. And so it's 30 or 40, I'm going to get the number wrong, but 30 or 45 seconds of dynamics that you're getting tumbled around underneath those parachutes. No, we knew ahead of time. We had a good team out at the SpaceX facility who had briefed us to no end and brought in charts to show us, hey, the G will be like this. And in the end, the big issue was the rotation from a physical perspective, because that was the thing that we noticed more than the loading. We've just been through 4 or 5 Gs, and so getting a shock of a 0.7 Gs or something was not nearly as substantial as the rotation that we kind of went through. And so, yep.
How about the entry plasma difference between shuttle and capsule?
I would say that the shuttle was so big that you really felt like it was kind of like being in a big car or on a big truck. So you could look out the window and you could see it. You could hear some more wind noise. but it was much more substantial inside of the Dragon capsule. In a smaller vehicle, the thrusters were really pushing it around to kind of manage the attitude, and you can hear all the thruster firings much more substantially than you could on the space shuttle. And so it was a loud experience. I hope someday they share the audio for what it sounds like in the belly of the Dragon coming home, because there's some noise associated with that, listening to those thrusters and the wind noise, and it's an exciting experience. So, yes, sir.
Back to a comparison of the ride up with the Falcon 9 and the shuttle. I mean, I know the sequences of both of them, but how did you feel about it? What was your impression?
The sequence for heads up hill.
For launch between the two to orbit.
You know, I think the biggest difference was pre-launch. So really on the space shuttle, nothing happens until just a few seconds prior to liftoff. When the main engine's lit, you would get a little bit of a rocking sensation. If you were looking out the right mirror at the back end of the vehicle, you could see the water flow start, which was an exciting thing. And then the solid rocket boosters lit, and you were on your way. With the Dragon capsule, since you're on board the Falcon 9 when it loads the fuel, like really that sequence of going into space seems to start closer to 45 minutes prior as you go through that whole loading operation. There's an arming of the launch escape system that they have, which has got some audibleness associated with it. So you can hear like a bang or something as that process is playing out. As it's loading the vehicle, you can hear and feel, it seems, the bubbling of the propellant kind of going into the tanks all the way to the time that it comes for the engines to get lit and you to be on your way. And so that was the biggest difference. Now, I mentioned first stage bumpy, solid rocket boosters, smoother with the liquids, but that second stage being low G, but a little bit more uncomfortable, if you will, than the shuttle was from my experience. But I've heard that the Soyuz is not dissimilar. There's some oscillation or some vibration in that second stage for the Soyuz as well. So, yes, sir.
The SpaceX launch had a lot of popping noise. Did you notice a difference in the pogo effect between SpaceX and shuttle?
I don't think on either vehicle I noticed any significant pogo event. There was not really any surging in the G's. There was the throttling. And so we had indications of when the vehicle was throttling, and you could feel some of that G on the vehicle as you kind of went through. The space shuttle, when it throttled, it tended to just bring back the throttle and hold it at that location. There's a little bit more of a sawtooth as they try to manage the G loading for the SpaceX vehicle. They don't try to manage it precisely. They are willing to do a little bit more of a sawtooth bang bang response to it. So that there was some little bit of surge associated with that, but it's not pogo in the traditional sense of a combustion chamber that's surging in its pressure. This is actual throttling that's being metered back in a sawtooth fashion. Yes, sir. And I'll jump into the slides here right after this one.
Was there anything just mainly unexpected about Dragon compared to your training for it?
I think that we were really well trained and had a really long training flow, and we're a part of the vehicle development for so many years and so closely tied to it that we had a pretty good handle on most of the things that we should expect. There were some funnies with a couple of the systems where we discovered a new feature of the system that we hadn't come across in training, but that's the nature or in development. That's kind of the nature of these vehicles. I'll say even on space shuttle missions, I'm going to get into it too much here, but on my first mission, we lost one of the cards inside of one of the computers that took out a bunch of the attitude control system control authority. And this was before we were supposed to punch off of the external tank, and you need to manage the orbiter attitude really carefully so that you don't get recontact. That was an unexpected phenomenon as well. I still remember the Capcom saying, we'll have words on that later. Like, that is not on Ascent what you ever expect to hear from a Capcom. You expect him to know, everything and 10 times more. That it's like, hey, I got it, and I'm going to give you the one bit that you need to know, but I'll tell you about that later. It was a different experience. So even on STS-123, we found something new. We obviously found some things on the demo mission.
You have a question online. You can
okay.
Speak if your mic's open.
Yeah, hey neighbor, it's Pete Hasbrook. Thanks for doing this.
Hey Pete, how are you?
Good. Hey, could you compare the white SpaceX launch and entry suits with the orange shuttle suits? Any pros and cons?
I would say you just did a great job. There's a white suit and an orange suit. But from my perspective, there are some features that I really liked about the ACES suit. I liked that the wrists, for example, had bearings in them, so that if you needed to do this with your hands to do an activity, you had a lot of flexibility. So those bearings in the wrist made a big difference. That suit was pretty well fitted to a guy that's of my stature, just the way that it was shaped. The SpaceX suit is very form-fitting, and so it is designed for one purpose, which is to provide a balloon for you to be live inside of if you lose pressure or if the spaceship is on fire, something wrong with the atmosphere inside of the capsule. And so it's not designed to do spacewalks. It's not designed to climb and run around in. And so when we get through the slides, I've worn a lot of suits, EMUs, ACES, the Boeing suit for Starliner, SpaceX suit, some of the advanced suits that we have kind of going forward. You have to understand what their mission is. And the SpaceX suit is really designed for, being that balloon and to have some aesthetics that some folks find pleasing, but it's not the suit I'd want to do an EVA in, because obviously I got a lot of experience in a different suit that treated me just right. So, but I don't know if that answers your question specifically, Pete, but if I had to pick my favorite suit, it's the spacewalking suit, the EMU. So,
no question. Thanks.
But Elon calls the SpaceX suit a space tuxedo, and so that's what I've heard it described. I haven't heard him say that, but I've heard it attributed to him. And so, it's like all spacesuits, a little bit uncomfortable, just like a tuxedo would be predicted to be. So, yes, sir.
So this was essentially a 2-month unplanned stay on the station. I know you weren't a station planner, but what was the upshoot of that in terms of consumables, inventory, and
maybe if I described it a little bit, over described it, because it was unplanned originally in the scheme of the 5 years that we spent trying to get ready for this mission. Obviously, in the spring of 2020, winter of 2020, when they started going down this direction, the consumables folks had to get their mind around it. They had to get the EMU gloves to space station, for example, for me to be able to do spacewalks. And so
it wasn't the spur of the moment.
It was not, hey, we're on space station, we got to stretch from an emergency perspective. It was, hey, you're doing a 7 to 10 day mission. And then, in the last few months, we put the things in place to be able to stay there longer. And so they ended up having like 4 months of clothes for both Doug and I, and 4 months of food. They didn't know how long we were going to stay, but they launched a lot of those consumables. And then when I got on orbit, and Doug and I were there, Chris came over and he's like, hey, how long are you guys staying? I said, as far as I know, as soon as we get these spacewalks done, they're going to want to get us home, because they want to swap us out and they need to get our capsule back and look at it closely so that they can launch Crew 1. And that was going to be a 6-month mission, which meant get our vehicle back, get it inspected, get the Dragon capsule certified to be able to fly the next long duration missions. And so, okay, I'm going to jump into this. Yes, sir.
What was the length of time of the high G load, the 4 to 5 G load? What was the length of time?
It's just a matter of seconds as it built up. It wasn't a spike to those seconds, but it was I don't have it off the top of my head what the duration was, but we were under elevated G for probably less than 2 minutes, but not at 5 Gs for 2 minutes. We ramped up to that peak and then we ramped back off of it. And how much that loading is going to be depends a little bit on when you do your deorbit burn and where your splashdown point is as they kind of manage it. So you get a little bit different G load, not substantially different, but a little bit different profile depending on where you're actually headed to. So I mentioned that they initially had a crew cadre that was assigned to the commercial space flights as they were coming forward. That was Eric Bowe, myself, Doug Hurley, and Sonny Williams. It started with 4 of us in 2015. So it was a long time from when they announced that we were going to be the people who flew those vehicles to when they actually flew. For 5 years for Doug and I, and we're still waiting to get the Boeing guys airborne. Gals too, because Sonny's a part of that. Initially, we actually had a role that supported both the Boeing vehicle and the Dragon vehicle. And so as a part of my responsibilities as this cadre, we got to be a part of the Starliner development team. That's the access arm on the far left-hand side of the display over here, where you can see this is the access arm that eventually was hoisted into place and attached to the pad down there at Kennedy, where they're going to launch Starliner from with the Atlas rocket. Got some time in the suit on the Boeing side. Got some time flying that vehicle. There was a Capcom role as well. And then we did travel out to Decatur, Alabama, where the booster was being put together, which was kind of a pretty cool experience to go out and see that facility and to be able to see the SpaceX activity in parallel with the Starliner activity. Early on in a program, when there are two providers and the government, in our case, is trying to figure out how to manage the requirement space so that they can build something, because you write requirements, and then there's a negotiation as to do we have to meet all those requirements, because you find some that are really hard. You find some that may not be as applicable to that vehicle design because you didn't envision how the provider would actually innovate. And so I think it was extremely helpful to have a handful of people who were able to see both and to ensure that as we massage those requirements, we are still meeting the overall mission need of being able to get to space station and kind of doing it in a fair fashion. And so just because something was hard doesn't mean we still didn't need it. And so being able to see, oh, hey, that's not hard for this provider, but it's easy for that provider, then we get the right pushback associated with that. Or if it was hard for everybody, then we actually knew on our side we needed to work a little bit harder to understand what we really needed from a requirements perspective if we had some flexibility.
Can you compare the Starliner capsules?
The two capsules, they're both capsules. The SpaceX vehicle has two seats that you can primarily operate the entire vehicle from either seat. The Starliner capsule has kind of a single seat that you can operate. There's a second seat that's close enough that you get good insight, but you probably can't really touch all the switches and things like that associated with it. Other than that, the physics of capsules getting into orbit and coming back are pretty similar. You start getting into differences between software and interfaces, I think. And so I think SpaceX gets a lot of credit for having no switches and all touch screens, but actually there's a lot of switches in the SpaceX vehicle. There's a handle that you can escape with. There is a execute button that actually, as you arm things up on the touchscreen, you push that execute button to kind of move it forward to get the right sort of reliability and fault tolerance kind of in place. The Boeing vehicle, it has some of the older design switches versus conformal push buttons like they have inside the SpaceX vehicle. But and then maybe there's twice as many or 3 times as many on the, but they're not. It's not like the shuttle had thousands of switches and Starliner has thousands of switches, and the Dragon capsule has 0. They're commiserate in terms of the number of switches, I think. So they're not off by orders of magnitude.
To lead on that, with respect to crew consensus and all, were you two the only ones that were providing crew input, or did y'all have a crew consensus report and be able to make effective changes to the crew dynamics or
So the question is about crew consensus report and how many people kind of were involved in that process. And so we started with 4 people that could support both Starliner and the Dragon capsule. And we tried to ensure that we got at least a consensus amongst the 4 of us as we went forward. And we brought additional players in from the astronaut office, depending on what the activity was. And so some things are relatively straightforward, like how many people's opinion about a drink bag do you need? Other things like manual flying capability, you need a kind of a wider audience. So you have to right size those things as well to get the right number of inputs. When we started, we just had the 4 folks. I'll show this slide here just with just side by side. You can see, that is the white room that Eric and I are walking down the hallway for on the SpaceX side. So very similar responsibilities between the 2 vehicles. Boeing had less water testing that we needed to be plugged into because their vehicle lands on land, of course. But being able to get to the actual flight hardware and climb inside of it was actually pretty cool. And again, I think on the previous slide, there's a point where I'm inside flying the vehicle here, touching the screens, and here Eric and I are doing the same thing on the Dragon capsule kind of going forward. We had a lot of responsibilities, as you might imagine, public appearance wise. It stretched over multiple administrations to be able to get this vehicle put together and fly it in space. And that's probably the biggest lessons learned from a NASA perspective, is that, we typically outlive any administration, and as we try to accomplish things and be able to go forward. And it's important to be able to function no matter who's in place from a political perspective with our programs. And NASA does an awesome job with that kind of across the board, I think. And it's something that we had to always, put our best foot forward, I think, trying to accomplish that as we try to get these programs that take more than the political cycle typically to get accomplished. We eventually grew more people as we separated out into Starliner and into the SpaceX side. And so we ended up with Chris Ferguson coming from the Boeing side initially, at least, with 4 folks focused on the Starliner vehicle and 4 folks focused on the Dragon vehicle, so that we could accomplish those crew consensuses and get our opinions kind of pulled together as a crew. But eventually, somebody's got to be the people who are going to fly the vehicle. And so Doug and I were going to go first. We got suits made, we were assigned, and there were 4 of us who were continuing to provide input. But Doug and I were going to go at least 6 months before anybody, and potentially a little bit longer than that, depending on how things played out. As a part of that development cycle, we did our best to take advantage of the opportunities that were out there. And so just like Artemis 1 kind of coming forward, and the astronaut office is pretty interested in being in place and a part of flight following that flight as it goes forward. Doug and I did the same thing with the Crew Dragon Demo Mission 1, which was uncrewed, other than their mannequin that they flew up inside the vehicle. It going off the same launch pad, same access area, docked to space station in a slightly more automated fashion than Doug and I ended up doing. We actually did some manual piloting coming in and initiated the final approach from inside the vehicle. And of course, that didn't happen on the Demo 1 mission. But they got 4 good mains and got that capsule back, which was a pretty exciting day to just be down in Florida as a part of it. Before we got the opportunity to fly with the SpaceX team, I often get asked the question as to, everything goes smoothly and everything super awesome as a part of doing a development program and getting the vehicle that flies in space. And the answer is obviously not. On the top left there is CRS-7. That was a cargo mission headed to the International Space Station. Didn't make it to the International Space Station. Dumped an EMU, a spacesuit, into the ocean. Kind of a rough day for the SpaceX team, but it was a cargo mission. So the year that this happened, I think it was the year that we also lost a Progress and we lost an orbital vehicle out on the East Coast as well. And so Space Station didn't miss a beat, right? We lost 3 vehicles, still too much science to do and too much stuff to happen on Space Station. And it's amazing that year went as smoothly as it did after losing those vehicles, but kind of a tribute to the robustness of the supply lines. Flash forward just a short period of time later, and Pad 40 down at the Kennedy Space Center actually was lost as a part of a fueling operation leading, I think, towards a static test maybe on the SpaceX side. But during this operation, they released a lot of energy unintentionally, rapid unscheduled disassembly like you read about. And so this was not necessarily the best thing, but these experiences really helped the SpaceX team understand, hey, when we do have humans on the pointy end of this rocket ship, we do have to have everything perfect as we kind of go forward. And so the SpaceX team learned something from the CRS-7 mission. They learned something from the Pad 40 incident, and they really learned something from the Demo 1 capsule that had just come back. They were doing a test down at Kennedy, and they lost that capsule. And the next one, that capsule was supposed to be used to do an abort test, and then Doug and I were supposed to go off and fly. And so to lose a capsule this late in the game, I think really caused the team to redouble their efforts and focus and to understand, do we really have everything under control kind of going forward? And so those opportunities, learning opportunities, were definitely a part of the development process. And I think the team got their mind around what they had lost and what they were able to move forward with. And they're just critical to being able to go forward. But at the same time, you need to go forward fast enough that you're accomplishing things, and how do you manage that rate? It's a tricky balancing act, but in the end, I think that we were able to get there with the SpaceX team. Of course, Demo-2, we saw the video. Our kids giving us air hugs on our way to the Teslas. Doug and I, alone and unafraid, on the climb-in level there, getting ready to ingress the capsule. Something we didn't get the opportunity was to wave at reporters on the way to the pad like we did in the Tesla vehicle, so that was a new experience for us. You saw us doing science. That's a fluid droplet experiment that I was a part of. I turned 50 in space, or my wife says that the 50th birthdays don't count if they happen in space. And so, but we did a little bit of a celebration associated with that. And then I think probably that's one of my favorite photos from the mission, was one that we took during a spacewalk of the Dragon capsule docked to the forward portion of the space station. Super cool. This is not something that happens to me every year, particularly twice in 1 year, but to be on the cover of Aviation Week twice in 1 year was kind of a interesting place to find myself when I turned 50, but that's where I was. But both for the spacewalk, for that mission that wasn't supposed to be, ISS turned 20 and Chris and I did 20 spacewalk, woohoo. And then inside the Dragon capsule for what I think people were probably billing as a short stay on the space station when that article was actually put together. Also, twice in 1 year, I flew to the space station on the Dragon capsule, and my wife flew on the same Dragon capsule. Just under a year later, she launched to the space station, stayed for roughly 7 months, and got to do the role reversal there twice in 1 year, which was pretty cool. Any questions at this point? How?
So what changes or updates based on your test flight did they make to the Dragon vehicle?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll just say that there were changes. There were things that we learned associated with the flight, everything from spacesuits to avionics. There's a long list of those changes. Unfortunately, I think we got to dig into the SpaceX team to kind of answer the mail in terms of what those changes were. But there's always things that need to be accomplished. I'll say probably the one that from a crew perspective, there's a lot of things that are safety improvements that make things better. But from a habitability and living in space perspective, figuring out the right way to pack all of your stuff inside of a Dragon capsule and have it accessible when you need it is, on the space shuttle, after 135 flights, we were still trying to figure that out. And they're still trying to figure out on the Dragon capsule how to get everything exactly where you need it in the right order, so you can eat and you can drink and you can change clothes and you can do all those things without climbing over the top of somebody or spending too much time doing things and then undoing them just a couple minutes later. Yes.
I think you have an online question.
Okay.
Oh. Well, so the Dragon waste management system hasn't gotten rave reviews. How did you think that was?
So for the Dragon waste management system, Doug and I were lucky there were 2 of us, right? So that kind of cuts in half the number of uses that need to happen. And we had a couple of rules on board the Dragon capsule, one of which is that we didn't bring any fish, because fish tends to, linger, I guess, inside the capsule if you have it in there. And we also didn't use all of the capability of the waste management system. We prepared appropriately, and then we saved it for the space station as we could. And so we minimized our use to not fully check out the operational capability of the waste management system. So I think there was a question online.
Yeah. Hi, Bob. My name is Mark Updegrove. One of the things I'm supporting is crew display and interface development for HLS. And so obviously SpaceX being the provider there, I'm wondering, as a crew and operator perspective, and also from a flight tester point of view, do you have any comments on the kind of innovative philosophy that SpaceX applies with no hand controllers being present and touchscreen, and how you think that could impact operations like the HLS mission?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it really depends on the capability that's going to be there from a vehicle perspective. So the Dragon capsule doesn't have, for coming back from space station, doesn't have the capability to manually pilot it under G. And you can make some changes and make some inputs to a computer, but you can't grab a hold of a control stick and move it around. And there's not a capability to go onto the touchscreen and say, okay, I want to click over to 0.2 Gs more to kind of steer yourself or go to 45 degrees of bank angle. There's just not that sort of a capability. I'm not familiar with the capabilities that are planned inside of the HLS. If there is a bunch of opportunity for biocoupling, like you need to pull load at the same time that you need to make inputs, a touchscreen is a poor interface for being able to do that. Where we got to with the SpaceX team was that we demanded that the handling qualities for the touchscreen interface be so good that that we were comfortable operating it. And so there was probably a higher standard required from a handling qualities capability perspective than they would have had they had a stick. And that capability we could have worked around, but they spent more time trying to massage and make sure that the control axes were pure, the sizing of the pulses was appropriate. They put a lot more effort into that control system than I think they would have had to if they had just given us a hand controller and kind of move forward. And I know this because we did a case where we could fly the vehicle with hand qualities with a stick, and then we had the touchscreen, and we said it's not good enough unless we have the stick. And so they went back and made the hand qualities better so that we could use the touchscreen in order to accomplish it. So you'll have to find out what those specific tasks are and really understand what capability you need. And it's a lot of it is being able to make an input when you're not looking at the interface. It sounds relatively simple, but you know, we can't text and drive at the same time because there's another mission in front of us of driving a car. If you have a heads-up display and you're allowed to slew cursors, maybe you can do something a little bit better for texting and driving. But understanding where that interface is and what you need to accomplish is that trade space that you're going to have to employ. What I've seen is HLS is really big, and it's so big that maybe it can just land on anything. You just dump it down and it's fine. But I don't have a lot of insight into that program.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate it. And that was for the touchscreen attitude and translation control. That was only rendezvous and docking, right?
Correct.
As you said, there was, okay. And that's pretty low dynamics. Would, just from a personal opinion point of view, how would you feel doing more dynamic piloting with just a touchscreen outside of rendezvous and docking?
Yeah, I personally would, you know, kind of need to see the task. I think they trained us at test pilot school to really want to understand what that task was and put those things side by side and actually go off and fly it. So if they want to have you go through this and not do a actual test campaign, I would say that then the touchscreen is probably not something you can agree to. But if you can put it in a centrifuge or you can put it in some place where you have similar loading conditions and work your way through it. There's some things you can do with the touchscreen and some things you can't. We set up the touchscreens in a centrifuge at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to show that we could make some minimal inputs under load, and we all knew that we could because we'd flown airplanes where you had to do that sort of a thing, both touchscreen or switches or dials or otherwise. But if you've got dynamics involved, you'll want to have the right test campaign to figure it out.
Very good. Appreciate your input. Thanks.
A couple slides back, you showed 4 failures that occurred on the path or things of this nature. What did you guys determine was the cause of those things, the kind of things that were missed by not doing frame weather effect analysis or not doing detailed testing or what?
In each one of these learning opportunities cases, I think that the combined NASA and SpaceX teams were able to resolve what the issue was, what the process escape was, and then make changes to what the pathway was going forward, whether that was vendor suppliers, whether it was understanding materials capabilities or compatibilities, or understanding kind of specifically were you operating the vehicle inside the realm where you were supposed to be operating the vehicle. All those legs of the fault tree were kind of exercised to resolve. There was a very formal process, and a NASA team, I won't say there was NASA participation, and I think that there were also independent teams on the NASA side that were looking at the details as well to bring them to resolution, to make sure that any lesson that was out there that dictated a process change, dictated an operations change, dictated hardware or design changes was incorporated kind of going forward.
So were they surprises over this kind of thing the guys said that shouldn't have happened?
Well, I think kind of across
they know about it ahead of time, obviously they correct it.
Yeah, obviously, none of these things can happen if you're going to put humans on your rocket and fly it into space, right? So all those things have to be fixed. Now the question is, how did you get there? Like, there could be institutional reasons for that, and none of these almost ever fault scenarios kind of plays out in the situation where, hey, well, there's this one thing and there was an institutional failure. Well, there's usually a design issue. There's usually some data that was overlooked or test case that wasn't included in the process. In addition to why did the people not think of asking for those questions? So it's usually this whole series of, it's kind of described as layers of Swiss cheese, and your failure manages to sneak through the alignment of the holes through that Swiss cheese. And I would say each one of these has probably multiple factors that needed to be addressed, and the team addressed those kind of going forward. And so I don't know specifically, other than like going into the details, like, hey, this is what happened in this specific case, and here's all the things that were fixed about it. None of these had one leg of the fault tree in this one specific thing that was addressed. They all resulted in multiple changes to try to improve the safety kind of going forward. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
How long was your training for your first shuttle flight as opposed to your first paper?
So my first shuttle flight was probably less than a year, roughly a year-ish, but a little bit less than that. We were scheduled to fly with definitely less than a year of training, but then there was a little bit of a hiccup in the shuttle launch sequence, and so we ended up going a couple months later. But it's not one-to-one where you get all that turns into training time. So usually, if you're lucky, you take some time off in that process if you're smart. The SpaceX vehicles, since we were doing the development, you could argue that my training flow was 5 years long, right? Because it wasn't invented, and so but the vehicle we were going to fly wasn't invented either. So it really kind of drug on quite a long time. Right now, space station training dominates the training flow, and so it's not a Dragon capsule or the Soyuz is a pretty substantial load, but the Dragon capsule is pretty light compared to what it takes in order to get trained on the space station side. Yes, sir.
I have a weird question, but like, is there a smell in the Dragon? I smell it.
I would say I didn't notice a new car smell in Dragon. We took the Florida air with us, so we kind of had that air, and then it probably smelled like Doug and I. But I will say, when we got to space station, I did remark to Chris that, hey, space station stinks, and he said people live here, so that's what happened. So space station definitely had more odors associated with it, but we had no fish, and rule number 2 to keep us safe on the Dragon side. So yes, sir.
Any thoughts on the process of which Dragon had all those learning opportunities and all that versus the approach taken with Orion that will only have the one flight?
You know, I can't speak too much on the Orion side. I haven't been super tied into the development cycle. There's been a lot of opportunity, a long time to kind of get to that point. We did have the luxury on the SpaceX side for the Falcon 9 vehicle to fly without us. Excuse me, and then add our capsule to the end of it with the crew. And so there's definitely having another customer is a great thing to get flight heritage, kind of drive safety with flights that don't involve humans. And so I'm hopeful, maybe it's a pipe dream, but that someday SLS gets some additional customers and you can continue to fly that vehicle and not just get human space flight experience. You can get other flights as well. There's a big difference. I mean, you learn a lot on the Soyuz side by having the Progress go on that same booster, and there's a lot of merit to that. Yes, sir.
So between your first flight and last flight, what's your experience on the aging of the station? I mean, what did you notice, exterior, interior?
The exterior of the space station is kind of beat up. There is a lot of pits and scratches and just damage to the exterior of the space station, because a lot of people have done spacewalks on it, and a lot of micro meteor. There's just places that you can see damage. Folks pointed out the aging, if you will, paints and things like that starting to show wear, and whether it's flaking or fraying or otherwise. The soft materials, the blankets that were white are starting to be brown and yellow. And so definitely a lot of changes. Inside the space station, it's primarily wear and tear by where people are or where equipment is. So scratches and things like that. And we did find some places on board space station where there was chafing of high pressure or oxygen lines, where we had to go in and reinforce some protection to try to keep some of those things from happening. Water lines that had similar sorts of issues that were there that we had to add to. And so space station's a big place. It's got a lot of parts, and you definitely got to watch out. And I think we will have some of those sorts of cases where, you know, cables get frayed and water lines get abraded and things like that as we continue to go forward. And all you can do is just have the crew be diligent. Every time you have an opportunity to open up a rack and look inside, you have to really not just do the job that you were in there for, but to also look closely to make sure that it's still in good repair. So, yes, sir.
So what are you going to do with the rest of your money?
That's a good question. My wife and I are trying to figure that out. We've had a lot of significant emotional events over the last couple of years between me flying and her flying and getting back. Our son did put his foot down and said no one flies in space this summer. So we've got that behind us, and now we'll have to figure out what we're going to do next. So that, you know, it was 5 years for me to fly, 10 years, 5 years once I was kind of in the mix, and then 10 years from my previous flight. I'm not sure I've got 10 more years in me and still be able to fly again, although we have flown people in their 60s. So, yes, sir.
I'll speak up. How was it clean? Was it clean? In other words, the mirror was filthy. We've been up there for 10 plus 20 years.
Yeah.
And we said we're going to do, you know, sweep or, you know, like a Navy before and after and everything. How's it looking?
It's pretty clean. Anything that isn't clean is in some sense, if it's observable, it's the crew's fault, because every weekend the crew kind of does a end-to-end clean on the U.S. side, at least, to really scrub things down and to wipe things off. In some cases, we've even wiped off we've cleaned so much, we've wiped the labels off of things that were there. The peroxide wipes do a pretty good job of removing things. And so we've wiped it down quite a bit. But there are times where you find out that, like, hey, nobody's looked around this corner for a little while, and you'll find dust bunnies and things like that you really need to clean up. But the crew tries to be pretty diligent. But if you look around and you've got a wipe in your hand, you can always find something that needs to be wiped out. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, the impression that everybody gets is that SpaceX team is pretty young. Is that true?
Everyone, you know, from a SpaceX perspective, folks talk about, hey, the SpaceX team is young, but SpaceX has been around a while now, right? It's not like they've been here for 3 years and they're flying. They've been around for quite a while. They've got some older heads that are kind of on the team as well that are a part of things, but they also kind of keep it fresh with continuing to bring people in. They have I don't know their attrition numbers, you know, kind of directly, but they do have a pretty good turnover with bringing folks in. They work for a few years and then they go on to do something else. And it's not all because, hey, they burned this person out. There's a lot of cases where the person is a hard charger and they were super excited about this, but now they're excited about climate change and they're going to go do something else with their life after, you know, working with the SpaceX team. There are some SpaceX lifers, but I think that they typically bring in a crowd of folks that in many cases chooses a second and third and fourth career. That's their plan. That's their lifestyle. They're not gonna be 30 or 40 year NASA employees. They're going to be 5-8 years at SpaceX, and they're going to go do something else that's exciting from their perspective as well. They just have a lot of energy and a lot of interest.
Over here during the early Apollo was on the order of 10% a year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the average age for us Apollo guys was 28 when we landed.
It went up 1 year every year.
Yeah. Well, that was the argument, I think, in the Apollo days was that you needed engineers in their 20s and managers in their 30s. So that's what you needed. And so that's not where NASA is right now. I would say the SpaceX team isn't that young. They definitely do have some younger folks. They also have the technicians kind of co-located with the responsible engineers. And so it can be hard to tell, which workforce is which in terms of age demographics and otherwise. But they've got a very diverse team. They keep it reinvigorated. Doing new things keeps it reinvigorated, right? So you build a cargo vehicle, you build a crew vehicle, you build the HLS vehicle, and you're building Starship. They're marching in. They've got a lot of irons in the fire from a hardware perspective that kind of keeps the team excited and keeps new people, being down the doors to be a part of it.
So was there a difference? I'm sorry, Danny, go ahead.
Did you run into Bill Earth and Mars, Ollie?
Yeah, we did. We actually, Bill was a big part of the NASA side of things for years, and we interacted with him quite a bit. And figuring out how to incorporate the operational team's inputs into a team's designs that wants to go faster and to not be burdened necessarily by too much government help. But none of the SpaceX guys, at least to start with, were going to operate that vehicle. So we did get a good relationship built with that team, where there was I think a respect that we were the responsible engineers from a crew perspective, and SpaceX didn't have too many of those people. So we were able to make a contribution. When Bill Gerstenmaier moved over, he obviously brought a bunch of NASA experience to how he helped them organize. And I think he's effectively safety and mission assurance, if you will, for that organization now. And so I think he can be he's a good conscience, if you will, for trying to manage how you go fast and learn from opportunities like this and not be defeated by them, right? So this is the kind of thing that if there's crew on board, your program gets canceled. The president comes to your quad and says, park those space shuttles, right? So you gotta have a healthy respect for not letting these happen for human spaceflight, but learning from them so that you can go fast enough that we can accomplish something.
Is there a big difference? Well, this is kind of a pay-place question, but the cohesiveness between the flight crew and the mission control out in Hawthorne versus flight crew and mission control in Houston? Because I know there was a captain who was going to be the ground controllers. The cohesiveness built pretty easy.
The question is about the cohesiveness between the various flight control teams and the crew. So we've got flight control teams, of course, here in Houston. We have a flight control team for ascent and entry on the Hawthorne side. They're there for docking and undocking as well. We've got Moscow and Scuba and the folks in Europe as well. So we've got a lot of mission controls. The crew's ability to get close with the flight control team kind of leading into missions and build that cohesiveness, I think probably peaked. And we would probably all agree on this from a shuttle perspective, because we did that a lot, and we had a well-oiled machine to kind of build that cohesiveness and how to get it back on track if there was a hiccup, or how to go fast if we needed to go fast for I think we had some Hubble missions that may have been 4 months or something. So it was a quick fuse to kind of get a crew and get them up to speed and get into orbit. We were able, I think, on the ascent and entry side, and in Doug and I's case, of course, we probably had more time with the people who are going to eventually be our flight controllers and our mission directors than follow-on crews did, because it took longer to get the first flight off. But we were able to build a good relationship with them. I think in general, it's always a struggle for the NASA astronauts to actually build a good camaraderie with the ISS flight control team, because they do so little with them in the lead up to launch. So if they don't have experience like sitting as a Capcom in the flight control team and learning some of the players, or at least how the machine works that's on the ground, it can be a problem. And so building that cohesiveness is, I think, hard on the ISS side. And so and then internationally, unless you have an international crew member, you won't have a good, I won't say won't have a good, your relationship won't be as extensive as it can be with Scuba without a JAXA crew member as a part of the team. And I think probably the same is a little bit true from an ESA perspective. And obviously the cosmonauts have their relationship with Moscow. So I think SpaceX and that operational team leading into flight is probably second best compared to where it was with shuttle, and shuttle's gone. So that makes them number one right now. So,
Thanks.
Melise, anything from you?
I'm just curious, what are you doing now?
What am I doing now? So right now I've been doing a fair number of public appearances and having a good summer vacation. So we got our son, got a chance to go to, my wife got back from space last year, right? She got through her post-flight. COVID relaxed a little bit, and then we were able to kind of take advantage of maybe 3 summers of pent-up vacation opportunity. So we went out and rode a steam train from Denver to Cheyenne, Wyoming, went to the rodeo there. So stuff like that. Work-wise, I was the deputy up at FOD for a period of time, and then I started a rotation with the headquarters team, and now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next.
So what was the difference working between NASA team and SpaceX team? What would you say the biggest difference?
I think that the biggest difference between the two teams was kind of figuring out how we were going to work together to make progress. I think the SpaceX team thought they could do it by themselves, and the NASA team was insistent that you couldn't do anything without them. And so trying to figure out how to navigate that in a way that you could kind of make progress and do it, cooperatively was and situations like this helped where we had a major malfunction that we had to work through, and they had to understand what had happened, and we all had to be comfortable going forward after it occurred. And so I think that that's kind of where we got to. And so I have this picture I can put in. So during the Demo-1 launch here, I think this is Elon trying to convince, I didn't know they were taking a picture. This is Elon trying to convince me that we don't need fault tolerance for our systems. So, and his point wasn't that fault tolerance is a bad thing. His point was that you should build things that don't fail, right? And so, which is it's a laudable point, right? We just unfortunately have grown up in a world where even when folks try their best to not have things fail, sometimes it's a good idea to have a backup plan as well. And it's a similar conversation I've had them over the years in terms of kind of riding that balance back and forth. 3 of the same thing that can all fail in the same way is not necessarily the kind of redundancy you're looking for. But if you can have an alternate system that's dissimilar technology or methodology to be the redundant, maybe you just need 2. One that's one design that's really good, and one that's a completely different design that's really good, and maybe that's how you balance that redundancy. So here we are having that discussion about fault tolerance versus redundancy, and what you really get by having redundancy without the appropriate amount of dissimilarity.
So what drove the 4th parachute?
That's a good question. I think that the cargo Dragon has 3. And so our vehicle is heavier, and so I think that they just needed an additional parachute from a slowing down perspective. I'm sure it's not as simple as you just put more parachutes on there and that makes it better. The deploy dynamics get a lot more complicated as you add moving parts to the system, and there's a reason why the Soyuz has 1 parachute and a completely backup replacement parachute if you have a problem with that one. But the actual trade space as to how did you get to 4 versus 3, I think it was probably the evolution of 3 to 4 based on the weight of the vehicle being a little bit larger, and there could be some redundancy details in there as well that I don't have off the top of my head though.
So it's Musk's law versus Murphy's law.
It is definitely that balance. Again, I saw this picture like weeks afterwards, and like, hey, you almost look staged, but we were deep in the discussion of me saying, yep, but we do like redundancy, and
all the money in the world.
Yeah.
And tell me again about the autopilot and the testing.
Yeah.
Those that's how you like make the emotion or the discussions more emotional, right? So we're trying to diffuse things and talk some about hey, what's your point of view and what's my point of view, and we'll ride that together as we work through those opportunity lessons that we have.
All the money in the world won't override Murphy's law, and he's trying to prove otherwise.
Okay, I'll move on to this one, and this is my favorite picture that I've managed to collect over the last 22 years. And it says, what do rock stars, ball players, and presidents want to be when they grow up? And it's from right before I was selected as an astronaut on a space day that had been pulled together, which I thought was pretty cool. So, all right, with that, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you today.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job. Boy, that was, we learned a lot about that mission. It sounds fascinating. And we wish you good luck on your future missions.
May it not take 10 years.
Yeah, really. Okay, well, everyone, today's presentation. Yeah, let's do for a little bit. Today's presentation was recorded, and it'll be on the Alumni League website, and it should be just a few days. And one announcement, Alumni League officers have a 2-year tenure, and we just, I think as of today, have a new set of officers. And like our new president is Estella Gillette. And our new vice president is Greg Blackburn. I don't think Greg's here today, right? And then treasurer is Susan Bramer. Is Susan here? Okay, but and secretary is Herb Baker. And then we've got most of the same directors, board directors here were elected. And so I'd like to give a shout out to our former president, Bill MacArthur. And I learned yesterday, Bill, we launched Artemis 1 Saturday. Bill is going to be the ABC network commentator. So watch ABC in between college football games, watch ABC.
Saturday at 1 o'clock.
Saturday at 1 o'clock, weather permitting.
Maybe.
Okay, you can stop the video now. Okay, so